appreciate you taking the time this evening. I know it's a bit late, but I think what we have to talk about is something that is very important for you making the right decisions. My name is Dan Adkins. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Transnational Academic Group. We operate Curtin University in Dubai, and I am here to talk with you about continuing your education in the time of COVID-19, because I'm sure a lot of you have been trying to decide what is the right thing to do, to continue, to defer. How should you approach this situation in this unprecedented time? So I'm sure you've all seen a lot of maps like this recently. This is the distribution of COVID-19, and as we all know, it's a worldwide pandemic affecting nearly every country on Earth, most of them severely. And I can tell you from my life experience that when you look back at your lives, you're going to divide your life into two parts: before COVID-19 and after COVID-19. Because after COVID-19, the world will never be the same again. It's going to be fundamentally different than what you've grown up in so far and what your parents grew up in. This not only means that the world is changing, it also means that you have to change in order to succeed in the new normal. So let's look at some of the impacts COVID-19 is causing. So what are we living with? Well, in the past several months, we've had to learn to live with lockdowns, non-essential businesses being closed, getting used to wearing masks everywhere, and all sorts of travel restrictions. All of these things certainly has an impact on you as a student and just as someone trying to live your life in a normal way. And it's had a lot of far-reaching impacts. Effects such as the unemployment rate having the fastest rise since the Great Depression of 1929. Businesses going bankrupt at nearly twice the rate of prior years, and this includes some very big companies going bankrupt. And of course, personal bankruptcies also growing at the fastest pace since the Great Depression. And consumer confidence, how confident people feel about the future, dropping by the greatest amount since it has been measured. So never in history has consumer confidence dropped so fast. So the question we have to ask is, how long is this pandemic going to last? And as you can see by this slide, some of the best minds in the world, like UC San Diego, are asking exactly the same question. And it all comes down to a concept you've probably heard people talking about on the news or just talking about on the street, but you probably don't actually understand. And it's important to understand this so you can make the right decisions when it comes to your future education. And it's a concept called herd immunity. So when this pandemic started, no one was immune to COVID-19 because it was a novel or new coronavirus. So the virus spread very rapidly. The rate at which a disease spreads is called the R0. And for COVID-19, the R0 is 2 or 3 times as fast as the flu or the common cold that we're used to dealing with. Now, normally when someone has had a virus, they become immune to that virus for most or all of their lives. However, this does not seem to be the case for coronaviruses. Of the 7 known coronaviruses that can infect humans, 4 of them have been shown to only give immunity for about 1 or 2 years. 2 of them, SARS and MERS, were so deadly that they died out before the immunity could be determined. And the last, COVID-19, has already seen people who have had the virus and recovered test positive again later. Now, we don't know if this is a testing error or if the human body is simply not able to create a sustained immune response, especially if the first infection proved mild. Thankfully, What we are being told is, as recently as last week, a scientific study was released showing that those who tested positively a second time were not able to infect other people, so they weren't able to transmit the virus. However, a vaccine based on, again, a scientific study that was just released 2 weeks ago should give a lasting immune response. Now, when enough people have either had the virus and become immune or have had the vaccine and are therefore immune, the virus can't spread and dies out because there are not enough people who can catch it to build a transmission network. That's what you're seeing in the bottom of this slide, and it's called herd immunity. Enough people have had the virus that anyone who is infectious is unlikely to run into somebody who isn't already immune, so the virus just dies out. Now, given the rate of spread of this virus, without a vaccine, we are most likely going to be looking at a situation similar to the 1918 flu pandemic, which lasted about 2 years. Our situation could possibly go longer if the natural immunity isn't lasting and people continue to get reinfected. Now, if one of the 8 vaccines, if one of the 8 vaccines that is currently in clinical trials is successful, it will likely take about another 2 years to get enough people vaccinated so that the virus can't spread. Notice that 2 years is the best case in either scenario, and some very credible experts are putting the end of the pandemic 3 years out. So during that time, we are likely to have rounds of lockdown, followed by periods of freer movement going back and forth to control the rate of infection and prevent the medical system from being overwhelmed. Germany, South Korea, and some of the states in the US are good indicators. They all locked down for about 2 months, and within 2 weeks of allowing some freedom of movement, the infection rate started to climb rapidly, and they're having to lock down again. So what are we looking at? We're looking at a long recovery. McKinsey & Company, one of the world's most respected consulting firms, has laid out 9 scenarios for how the economy might recover. The best estimates by economic experts who are actually taking into account the projections of the pandemic experts is that the world is going to go through an economic downturn as bad or worse than the 2008 global financial crisis. And that will likely take at least 10 years after the end of the pandemic for the economy to get back to the size it was before the pandemic. This is similar to what is shown on this chart of B1, B2, B3, B4, B5. These are all long recoveries. The short recoveries shown in A1, 2, 3, and 4 have only historically happened when the thing that caused the crisis was very short-lived, something that happened and lasted a few days, a week at the most. When we're talking about a pandemic that is likely to go on for 2 to 3 years, the recovery is also going to be long. Now, all of these things I've talked about might be making you consider delaying your undergraduate or postgraduate studies, but let me show you why that is not the best idea. So let's talk first about delaying undergraduate. When someone delays the start of their undergraduate study, 2 things happen that will adversely affect the student when they go to university. First, they get out of the habit of studying. And just like getting out of the habit of exercising, when you try to start again, it's hard and it hurts. It's much easier to maintain the habit straight through your studies. Secondly, the great psychologist Ebbinghaus has shown how quickly we as humans forget things. When a student takes the summer off, the school that they're going to has to spend the first few weeks of the fall term revising what was covered in the prior year. When someone takes an entire year off, it's been shown that they forget well over 80% of what they have learned. And unfortunately, because universities have people joining from so many different curricula, from so many different parts of the world, they're not set up to revise what was forgotten. It just isn't part of the curriculum, which means that a student who has forgotten has to struggle to catch up on their own. Scientific studies have also shown other impacts from taking a gap year or deferring by a year. Those who take a gap year are actually less likely to ever attend university. Only about 90% of the students who were intending to go to university and took a gap year actually ever went to university. It's also been shown that students who take gap years are significantly more likely to engage in risky behavior like alcohol and drug use. Students who have taken a gap year on average take 2 to 3 years longer to complete their degree once they start university. And it's because they got out of the habit of studying at a full-time load. Those who have taken a gap year are also less likely to ever finish their degree. And of course, because of the delay in both starting and finishing their degrees, those who took a gap year on average have an annual salary that is lower at age 30 than those who didn't. And of course, because of the delay in both starting and finishing their degrees, those who took a gap year also have lower lifetime earnings because they had less years to work before retirement and also had less years in which they could get promotions and move into higher, better paying positions. Now, there are websites that you will see that report some positive outcomes from taking a gap year, but there are two problems with these. First, they're not based on any actual scientific study, but rather on self-reporting, which historically tends to be overwhelmingly positive. And they're generally websites that are involved with getting people to take gap years, like travel agents. So not a credible source. It's important to remember that this situation with the COVID-19 pandemic is also different. Of those who take a gap year, they generally take 1 year. But if you're delaying the start of your undergraduate until COVID-19 is over and you can be absolutely sure of face-to-face classes, you may be waiting up to 3 years, which makes the problem of forgetting and the lower earnings much worse. Also, most people who took a gap year in the scientific studies use that year to travel or do other volunteer work, both of which may be difficult or impossible during the pandemic. So the gap years for most who delay their schooling during the pandemic will likely involve eating too much food while sitting on the couch and watching the entirety of Netflix, both of which are not going to provide any transferable skills that employers will be looking for. Well, what if you're a postgraduate student who's already working? You may be concerned that during the time of COVID-19, you'll get laid off or have your salary reduced. But let's look at that. When I started my MBA, the day I got my acceptance and signed my offer letter, I put on my CV, MBA in progress, expected completion, 1995. And I sent that to my HR department and to my boss. And from that day forward, they started treating me as if I already had the MBA. So once you have that master's degree in progress on your CV, you will have set yourself apart. And if an employer is having to decide between two people to lay off, do you think they'll lay off the one who only has a bachelor's degree or the one who is investing in himself or herself and becoming more valuable to the company by working on a master's degree? So by starting on the master's degree, you make it less likely that you'll get laid off. But even if you do get laid off, who will have an easier time getting a new job? A person with just a bachelor's or someone who's investing in himself or herself and upskilling with a master's? And remember, while about 14% of the people in the world have bachelor's degrees, less than 1% have master's degrees. So you've set yourself apart. Now, After I put the MBA in progress on my CV, I got a promotion even before I'd completed the MBA. So you may be able to secure a promotion when you start your master's, or at least make yourself more promotable when the crisis is over. Also, after I'd put it on my CV, I got hired into a better position by a better company. So you could have the same thing happen to you, either during the crisis or when it ends. In any case, by starting now, you'll finish sooner and therefore have more working years post-degree, which makes you more likely to get promotions and raises and ultimately leads to a higher lifetime earnings. So this time of crisis is the perfect time to invest in your future. You can invest in yourself right now by starting